Today, we are diving into the incredible story of how a brand new nation, India, literally drew up a blueprint to build its economic future right from scratch.
I mean, just think about it for a second. It's the middle of the 20th century, and you've been handed the keys to shape the destiny of hundreds of millions of people. Where do you even start? Well, that was the monumental question facing India right after independence.
And India's answer to that giant question? Well, it wasn't to just cross their fingers and hope for the best. Nope. They decided to create a deliberate, super detailed blueprint for the future.
So just a few years into its life as a new country, the government set up something called the Planning Commission. This was a big deal. It was headed by the Prime Minister, and it brought together the top minds to draft a roadmap for the entire country. The whole idea was to be in the driver's seat of the economy, not just a passenger.
So what was this tool they chose to use? It's called economic planning, and it's a really powerful idea for directing a country's resources where they need to go most.
Let's break that down. Think of it like this. You've got a deadline and you've got a set of goals. First, you figure out what you have to work with, your resources. Then, an authority, in this case, the Planning Commission, decides the best way to use those resources to hit your targets. Simple, right?
And the key phrase here is conscious decision. This is the exact opposite of guesswork. It's all about making the big calls. What do we build? How much of it? And who gets it? But doing it based on a deep, thorough understanding of the entire economy.
Okay, so that all sounds pretty good in theory, but how did it actually work in the real world? Let's get into the nuts and bolts.
The process they set up was actually very logical. It started with a massive survey to see what the country had. From there, they set some big national goals. Then they got more specific, fixing priorities and hard targets. The next, and maybe hardest part, was getting the resources together through things like taxes and savings. And, crucially, they had to keep checking in to see if they were actually on track.
And all of this was guided by a few key principles. You needed a central authority calling the shots, a fixed time period, usually 5 years, to give it structure, and you absolutely had to get the central government and the states on the same page. But this last one is really important: flexibility. They knew the world could change in an instant, so the plan had to be able to bend without breaking.
All right, with all that theory out of the way, let's get to the real-world story of India's 12 five-year plans. And let me tell you, it's a story with some incredible highs and some really tough lows.
Let's start with a major high point. This number, 6.8%, was the average growth rate during the 8th five-year plan back in the 90s. Now, their target was 5.6%, so they didn't just meet their goal, they absolutely smashed it. This was a time of incredible economic energy.
But like I said, the story wasn't always that rosy. Take this number. During the third five-year plan in the early 60s, the target was an ambitious 5.6%, but what they actually achieved was less than half of that. This was a period of some serious setbacks.
So what gives? How can you have such huge swings in performance? What was going on between setting those ambitious goals and what actually happened on the ground? Well, when you look at the whole picture, some fascinating patterns start to emerge.
This table really gives us the bird's eye view. Just look at how the main goals changed over time. The very first plan was all about agriculture, and hey, it actually did better than expected. But then you see the third plan, that big miss we just talked about. Well, it was hit hard by outside events, like wars with China and Pakistan. By the time we get to the fifth plan, the main goal had shifted to the removal of poverty, and they got incredibly close to their target. What this really shows is a constant dance between big dreams and the messy reality of a changing world.
Okay, let's zoom in on the final chapter of this whole era. The 12th and last plan had an objective that sounds really modern, doesn't it? It wasn't just about growth for growth's sake. It was about growth that was sustainable for the planet and inclusive for every single person in society. And this modern approach came with some seriously high ambitions. I mean, look at this. They were targeting a massive 10% growth rate for manufacturing to create jobs, right? Alongside a really strong 8% overall GDP growth target.
But after more than 60 years, the story of the five-year plans was coming to a close. This marked a really significant pivot in how India thought about its economic strategy.
So in 2015, the government dissolved the Planning Commission, and in its place, a new body was created, Niti Aayog. And trust me, this was way more than just a name change. In a world that was getting way more complex and globalized, it signaled a shift away from these rigid, top-down five-year plans to a more flexible model, with Niti Aayog acting more like a think tank for the government.
So after this whole journey, from the very first plan to the creation of Niti Aayog, what's the one big thing you should walk away with?
It really all comes down to this one question. For over 60 years, centralized planning was India's main tool for building its economy. It had huge successes and some pretty big failures. The fact that it was replaced suggests we're on a new path. But does that mean the whole idea of having a big, coordinated economic vision is just old-fashioned? Or could it be a tool that nations turn to again to tackle the huge, complex challenges of the future? Now that is something worth thinking about.
For, more than 65 years, India's entire economic strategy was pretty much set in stone by one single powerful system. And then, bam, in 2017, it all just stopped. It was replaced by something completely different. So today, we're going to break down the institution that really changed the game, Niti Aayog. Let's get into it. So get this, starting all the way back in 1951, India's development was mapped out by a series of 12 distinct 5-year plans. I mean, you can think of them as these gigantic nationwide blueprints. They dictated everything, right? From infrastructure to industry. And it was all directed from the top, from the central government. For decades, this was just how things were done, no questions asked. And then, on March 31st, 2017, it was just over. The 12th and final 5-year plan wrapped up, and with it, a whole era of economic planning came to an end. Now, this wasn't some minor tweak in policy. Oh no, this was a massive fundamental change, which of course leads us to the big question. What came next? And maybe, more importantly, why? Right, so let's unpack that. The end of that final plan wasn't just about closing a chapter. It was really the formal kickoff for a totally new way of thinking about how India would build its future. Okay, this timeline really puts it in perspective. You see the 5-year plans kicking off way back in 51, but look closely at that middle date. Niti Aayog got the green light on January 1st, 2015. That's 2 full years before the old system was officially done. What does that tell you? It's a huge clue that this new way of thinking was already being built behind the scenes. All right, so the old guard has officially retired, and a brand new player has stepped onto the field. Let's meet the institution that's right at the center of this whole transformation, Niti Aayog. So officially, Niti Aayog is called the Government of India's top policy think tank. But what does that actually mean, right? Well, think of it like this. It's an in-house team of experts. Their job isn't to give orders. Instead, they're there to analyze problems, give advice, and come up with creative solutions to the country's biggest, toughest challenges. And just look at the name, the National Institution for Transforming India. I mean, they're not hiding it, right? This is all about big, big change. Its whole mission isn't just about making plans, it's about creating a shared vision. And here's the absolute key. Its principles are all about strengthening federalism and decentralizing power. It's about giving the individual states a much bigger role to play. That is a total 180 from the old way of doing things. Which really gets us to the heart of it, the fundamental why behind this whole shift. It's a huge philosophical change, moving away from that old top-down command and control structure to something much more collaborative, much more like a team. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. The old way, centralized planning. It was like having a movie director who tells every single actor exactly where to stand, what to say, every little detail. The new way, which is called cooperative federalism, well, that's more like an ensemble cast in a great film, where the center and the states are all working together as partners to create something amazing. So yeah, cooperative federalism, that's the magic phrase here. It's a system that's built to make sure the states aren't just sitting back and receiving orders. No, they're meant to be active players in actually creating a national policy. So the center's job changes completely, from being a commander to being more of a supportive guide. Okay, so if this is a team effort, who's actually on the team? Who runs the show? How is this whole thing structured to make that collaboration actually, happen? Let's find out. The real engine room, the place where all this collaboration really comes to life, is the Governing Council. So, take a guess. Who do you think gets a seat at this really important table? And here's the answer. And honestly, it's kind of a masterstroke. The Governing Council is made up of the chief ministers of all the states, plus the governors of the union territories. Think about that. By its very design, the leadership of every state is baked right into the national policymaking process from the get-go. This isn't just some nice idea on paper, this is cooperative federalism in action. And here's a quick look at the rest of the organizational setup. Right at the top, you've got the Prime Minister of India as the chairperson, which tells you just how important this body is. Then you've got a vice chairperson, some full-time and part-time members, a few key ministers, and a CEO. And they're all appointed by the PM to be that core strategic group. Okay, so we've talked about the why behind the change and the who that's running it. So now let's get into the what. What does Niti Aayog actually do? What's its day-to-day playbook look like? You can basically boil it down to 5 core missions. First, it helps create that shared national agenda we talked about. Second, it's there to support the states. Third, it encourages planning from the bottom up. Fourth, it acts as a hub for knowledge and new ideas. And fifth, and this is so important, it monitors and evaluates how everything is going. Let's just zoom in on a couple of those because they're really key. Decentralized planning. That literally means flipping the old model on its head. You start building policy from the village level and work your way up. As a knowledge hub, its job is to be a resource center to figure out what's working best and then share those ideas. And supporting states, that means it's their champion, their advocate, fighting for their ideas at the central government level. But honestly, maybe its most critical job is that last one, monitoring and evaluation. I mean, it's all about tracking progress to turn plans into reality. Because you can have the best ideas in the world, right? But if they don't actually happen, what's the point? This is about making sure plans lead to real results on the ground. So if there's just one thing you remember from all of this, let it be this simple idea. Niti Aayog is designed to be a collaborator, not a commander. The entire philosophy is about shifting from a central government that dictates orders to one that acts as a partner to help everyone succeed. And that really leaves us with a big final question to think about. For over half a century, the 5-year plans were the engine of India's development. Now, the challenge for Niti Aayog is just immense. We live in a world that's changing faster than ever. So can this new model of teamwork, this cooperative federalism, truly be the engine that builds India's future? It's a huge question. Hey everyone, and welcome. So today we're going to tackle a really big shift in how one of the world's largest economies gets managed. We're talking about India's move from its old school planning commission to the newer Niti Aayog. All right, let's get right into it. No, really, just stop and think about that for a second. How do you even begin to plan an economy for more than 1 billion people? The sheer scale of it is just staggering. For decades, India had one answer to that question. And then, suddenly, everything changed. All right, so let's start with the original powerhouse of India's economy. For most of its history as an independent nation, the whole economic game plan was run by one single central institution, the Planning Commission. So picture this, it's March 15th, 1950. The Planning Commission is born. Now, this wasn't just some government office. For over 60 years, this was the absolute nerve center of India's economic strategy. It gave us those famous 5-year plans, a model that made sense for a young country that really needed strong central guidance. And power is absolutely the key word here. The Planning Commission didn't just throw out ideas. Oh no, it had the real authority to create national policies. And most importantly, it held the purse strings. It decided who got money, which ministries, which states, and that funding was tied to its projects. You know, a classic top-down approach, which a lot of people started to feel was just too rigid for a modern, fast-moving economy. But after more than 6 decades of doing things this way, the system went through a pretty radical transformation. The era of the all-powerful central planner was over, and it was replaced with a whole new philosophy, one that was built for the 21st century. And then, bam. January 1st, 2015, the Planning Commission is officially gone. In its place, a new body with a new name and a very, very different mission, Niti Aayog. And this right here, this pretty much explains the whole game. Niti Aayog is specifically called an advisory body, a think tank. Its job is to do the research, come up with strategies, and give advice. But notice what's missing. It has no power to hand out money or create policies all by itself. The big idea was to separate the planning from the funding to let more ideas bubble up. It's an advisor, not a director. So, we've got our 2 main players. Now let's put them side by side to really get how deep this change goes. This is where you can see the old model really making way for the new one. Honestly, this one line says it all. This was so much more than just changing a name on a building. It was a fundamental shift in identity. It's about moving from a system where one central body pulled all the economic levers to a system designed to advise, to collaborate, and to guide all the different players in a super complex modern economy. Okay, so let's talk about the big one, money and power. The Planning Commission, over on the left, literally held the purse strings. It made the policies and then decided who got the cash to make them happen. But Niti Aayog, on the right, is a strategic guide. It leaves the actual job of allocating funds to the finance ministry. This completely dismantled that direct, centralized financial control, which gives states and ministries way more freedom. And this change didn't just happen at the top. It totally flipped the script for India's states. Under the old system, the states had a pretty limited role. It was basically a one-way street, with instructions coming down from the center. But with Niti Aayog, the goal is something called cooperative federalism. It's supposed to be a two-way conversation where state governments are treated as real, active partners in building their own economic destinies. Even the way these two bodies are built is totally different. Think of the Planning Commission as, well, kind of a monolith, right? A fixed, permanent crew. Niti Aayog, on the other hand, is designed to be way more dynamic. It has a CEO picked by the Prime Minister, and it can bring in part-time members whenever it needs to. This allows it to pull in specialized experts from all kinds of fields to tackle specific problems. All right, so as we start to pull all of this together, what's the big picture takeaway here? Really, the entire relationship between the central government and the states on economic planning has been completely redefined. It's gone from a top-down instruction to a collaborative partnership. So if you remember nothing else, remember these three massive shifts. First, the move from a fund allocator to an advisory think tank. Second, going from centralized control to cooperative federalism, where states are actual partners. And third, a change from a rigid, fixed structure to one that's all about flexible, on-demand expertise. Look, this transformation from the Commission to the Aayog is a huge deal in India's economic history. But it also makes you wonder about what's next. As the country keeps growing and changing at an incredible pace, what will the next evolution of economic guidance even look like? It really makes you think, doesn't it? Thanks for joining me on this one.